Hello and welcome to another episode of FrostBytes, where logistics and tech meet a fresh perspective. I'm your host and co-founder, Ilya Preston, and today for episode number 4, we're joined by a true leader from the world of supply chain packaging, Balaji Jayakumar. In this episode, we'll not only dive into his incredible career, but also his perspectives on technology, overcoming industry challenges, and what's next for cold chain logistics. Balaji has over a decade of experience in cold chain and packaging solutions within blood, specialty pharma, and vaccine distribution industry, and is currently the COO and co-founder of MaxQ, a leading cold chain packaging and solutions company. Prior to MaxQ, Balaji was director of strategy and operations at MetCell, where he was responsible for proposing and executing technology and commercialization proposals for state and federal agencies. Balaji, we're thrilled to have you on the show, particularly because I think you're our first founder, just like me, and our first representative from the packaging industry. Welcome.
Thank you, Ilya. Glad to be here. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. So, Balaji, before we get into your background, we want to start off with our usual shock to the system with what we call Balaji's hot take. What is the one opinion that you have about cold chain logistics industry in general that others might find controversial or contrarian?
Um, Controversial. I would say ownership, more specifically data ownership. So there's a lot of adoption when it comes to technology, at least in terms of awareness. The cold chain is extremely aware of all the technology that's available with respect to real-time data and so on and so forth. But I think one of the key aspects is data ownership. Like who owns the data? Because at any given cold chain, there's probably 4 to 5 stakeholders: a pharma company, a packaging company, a freight forwarder, a device provider, and maybe a control tower, for example. So there's a lot of different types of stakeholders, and there is silos of data floating around across these stakeholders. Probably the biggest question that we're trying to answer is who owns the data? Because from ownership comes accountability, from accountability comes action.
Yes.
So if that can be clearly defined, then actionable intelligence becomes a piece of it. So with respect to technology and cold chain, I feel like there is a good amount of delta there that can be narrowed down.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think the de facto kind of status quo ownership model, at least from what we've seen today, has typically always resided with the pharmaceutical company or whoever the owner of the product, the drug, is in any given supply chain. Have you seen instances where that has actually been brought into question and challenged?
It's more of a concept rather than a reality for a good reason, because
Mhm.
over the last couple of decades, as we all know, we all start to kind of see and people talk about IoT devices to a point where it's almost a commodity.
Yeah.
Like anybody can go to a marketplace, get an IoT device today,
Yes.
but the adoption has been significantly limited. One might say it's because of all the red tapes that
Yeah.
exist, and why fix something that's broken? That's kind of the mentality here. But why let something break in the first place? So I think the shift of going from a reactive position to a proactive position is probably what is required.
Mhm.
But to go back to your question, I have not seen an instance because I think the adoption has been so slow, and the reality hasn't hit us yet.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think your point around accountability is spot on. What are some of the repercussions that you've seen as a result of ambiguous questions around data ownership?
Um, so let's take in terms of action, right? So
Mhm.
even if there is a real time, let's just say there is a shipment that's going across the supply chain, across the different stakeholders. Every stakeholder is going to have access to the data because they all have a certain link that they can click and look at the data and so on and so forth. But say something is going to go, for instance, out of temperature, who's going to take an action?
Yeah.
So that is probably the biggest question. And if they're going to take an action, what action is that going to be? And whatever action it is, can it be compliant?
Mm-hmm.
Be recorded? Can it fit into the digital chain of custody framework? I think these are all sort of lingering questions. And I think it's probably going to take a good 5 to 10 years before all this can actually take into account, because it's probably going to take the first 2 or 3 risk takers, early pioneers, to kind of go out and say, okay, we're going to have to do it,
Yeah.
and for a good reason. So,
Right. No, and so that's a great example. I've seen instances myself where, the more parties that you have in the mix, let's say you have, a control tower, to your point, you have device data. If the devices, let's say, are not pinging as they should, every recording temperature every 15 minutes, or not pinging every 60 minutes, is that the fault of the control tower that's reporting that data? Is that the fault of the device company? Is it someone else? Are there other integrators in play where there's latency? Or, so yeah, it's a great point, and I agree with you. I mean, I would say it's hopefully not that controversial at this point. I hope most people would agree with that sentiment, but certainly an important point to raise. So excellent. Well, I guess let's switch gears to your journey in what we call your cold start. So Balaji's cold start. You've obviously had an incredible path of building MaxQ. I founder to founder. I'd love to hear about that story. How did you get started?
excellent. So, me and my fellow co-founders, in early 2011, I believe, our idea initially was was completely different from cold chain. So when we came together with the concept, the idea was to create microgravity, to create Mars and Moon-like environments here on Earth. So we essentially wanted to fly drones and create different types of microgravity here on Earth for experiments and so many other purposes. So we went to NASA and proposed this concept, and NASA kind of hinted us and said the concept is great, but there's not a lot of commercial potential, so to speak. So they redirected us and to go build some cube satellites. So cube satellites are 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter by 10, like very very small satellites that
Mm-hmm.
actually go into space. So we started working with a research organization in the West Coast, and we started working towards building some cube satellites. We again hit a wall there, and there was really not much of a path with respect to growth. And that's when NASA also gave us a good feedback, and they nudged and said, the thermal technology, the material technology is great. Why don't you guys take the same thing and go adopt that in life science applications? So probably around the 2014, 2015 timeframe is when we started refocusing our efforts, took the same tech that we were proposing in the aerospace world, and started trying to use similar technology to come into the cold chain space. So that was the journey. We started, I want to say we started in 2015 to serve the cold chain space in general. And our primary target sort of customer space was blood,
Mm.
because it was a very niche market where 10 years ago we saw people using igloos and Rubbermaid coolers for storing and transporting blood products.
Sure.
So it was more commercial grade coolers that are available in your typical Walmarts and Targets, and that was not the most precise way, most scientific way of keeping blood products in temperature, given the nature of blood itself. So we saw a very important opportunity there where we can contribute immediately. So we started venturing into that, and then we realized that we can actually help the whole blood supply chain, whether it's within a hospital blood bank or within a blood supply chain. We can provide different types of products tailored to blood closely. So we spent a good amount of time talking to customers, understanding the problems, pain points, and then would put some purpose designed blood products out there. We learned that the same sort of thematic or sort of ideology can be used in other spaces as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever works for blood, which is a biologic, can work for, say, vaccines, for example, or cell and gene, or specialty medicines, insulins that are going directly to patients, to organs, irrespective of what the biologic is. The temperature control packaging should be the same. So we sort of adopted this similar technologies and adapted them to different industries, and here we are today. servicing, I want to say, close to 1,400 customers, plus or minus, across the world, predominantly here in the States.
Congrats. That's quite the journey. That's quite the pivot from microgravity systems to packaging. What is the status quo? Meaning, so I think you mentioned it a little bit, but what's the alternative? What were people doing before you introduced MaxQ's thermal packaging solutions? How are they shipping blood? And what are some of the challenges generally around shipping blood and other therapeutics, biologics, et cetera?
Yeah. So, like I said, the status quo was mostly commercial grade coolers, right? So commercial grade coolers that you would use for recreational purposes. Coolers in which you would throw scoops of ice, put your food or beverage or stuff cold when you go out for a picnic or a park or whatever. But um, the other sort of predominantly used packaging was basically cardboard and styrofoam. So typically, if it is within a hospital blood bank, for example, a recreational cooler was used with scoops of ice to kind of keep blood in temperature. The other option, when a blood is kind of transported either through across from mobile sites to processing centers or processing center to a hospital, it is usually cardboard and styrofoam boxes.
Yeah.
Both of those are inefficient, both in terms of thermal performance and in terms of space as well. In terms of thermal performance, it is inefficient, and the reason it has to be very efficient is because obviously product safety. You want to keep blood in temperature. Um, the interesting part about blood is different types of blood products are to be stored in different temperatures. Red cells, for example, is supposed to be between 1 to 6 degrees Celsius, platelets 20 to 24, and some whole blood cases it's 1 to 10. So there is a really tight temperature range for every different blood product, and wet ice and a cooler cannot really accomplish all of that.
Right.
So I think you have to have different type of things for different types of cooling mechanisms, different engineered products for different blood products, so to speak. And that is where we saw the opportunity. And in terms of using styrofoam and cardboard itself, again, the coolant there was wet ice as well. So not the most efficient, not the most environmentally friendly either. So that is where we saw the opportunity to plug in.
Interesting. Yeah, you're certainly filling a need there. So obviously, you mentioned 2015 is kind of when you entered cold chain. You've been at it for, I guess, a decade now, as of this year. I'm sure you've come across some hot challenges along the way. So I'm curious, could you share one of the bigger hurdles that you faced along the way? Whether it's implementing, real-time visibility as a part of your solution, the pivot itself, navigating a global pandemic. What's been the toughest test so far for you guys?
Yeah, I would say a test and a lesson, if you will, is when we started taking this pivot of coming into the cold chain. The first product that we actually put on the table was using aerospace grade materials. We used some advanced composites, built a really nice cooler per se. Whatever material we were trying to put on a cube satellite, we actually used the exact same material and started making some coolers and shippers out of it. It performed fantastic. It was great, but the industry was not needing it because they were needing a cooler or a shipper at a certain dollar range, providing a certain output. And we kind of over-engineered the whole thing. And that was a great sort of test and sort of a lesson for us, which is you cannot take a technology and make the industry adopt to it. I think you have to understand the industry and help the technology and adopt it to it. So it has to work the other way around. So that was a very big lesson. And moving from a cost mindset to a value mindset and kind of driving that to the customer, that's another sort of a learning curve that we got, from that kind of an experience.
Yeah, solution in search of a problem, right? The classic founder dilemma. I think ourselves included, we've certainly seen that play out in very real examples, either with us or with other founders that I've spoken to. So it makes a lot of sense. You gotta it's the dichotomy between ask the customer what they wanted. If I would have asked the customer what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So understanding the limitations of today's scope and kind of their current operations and what they might dream as possible, but balancing that with actual realistic and implementable operational solutions that fit within their workflows, that and balancing the two, right? You have to have some form of vision to drive the industry forward, but it's hard to make especially like a massive leap where you're changing workflows and just completely over solutioning without truly understanding how it's going to fit into their operational plan. That's
Well, one of the value points we always talk about and we try to bring across is the cost it takes to bring a technology in is going to be minuscule compared to the price we pay when we lose the product. So, but it's easier said than done, and the value has to kind of fit into the industry, into the culture of the customer you're talking about. So, I think that's where the hurdle is to kind of fill the gap.
Yeah. And on that note, do you see product loss in your supply chains?
There was, and I'm extremely proud to say we have done our very best to kind of minimize that to near zero.
Mhm.
There is still a lot of losses in the blood chain, in biologics in general. I don't think that's gone down significantly, so to speak. But in the world of blood, at least I can speak that most of our customers that we have worked with have reported near zero blood losses, which is great. And we are touching over 23 million blood products every single year. So with that kind of a number, it is good to know. But as an industry in general, in the larger supply chain, footprint, I feel like there is still a lot of product losses.
Yeah. And what do you think needs to happen to get to, call it zero loss, to eliminate as much? So if you had a magic wand, what would you do between now and then to eliminate as much loss as you can?
Um, Faster adoption of technology. It's an easier answer to give you because uh, I to me, the way I've seen the industry, I think there is enough awareness in the industry about how much technology is available. I don't think there is a dearth of awareness, so to speak. I think the biggest gap is awareness and adoption. So you know what's available, you know the capability, but how do you actually take it and adopt it to your supply chain? I think that is where the solution is. So there's two things, right? One, things that we control, things that we don't control. So things that I think the technology has to fall into the things that we control category.
Yeah.
Because user error is always going to be there, irrespective of what technology you use, whichever AI framework that we put there. I think user errors are going to be a part of the supply chain. Those are things we have to hedge by using technology. So that is where preventive action actually comes into the picture. So I think the shifting mindset between getting reactive versus getting proactive, that is actually going to help reduce the amount of losses. So it's a if I had a magic wand, I would say I would say adopt the technology.
Yeah.
Get proactive than being reactive.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think from what we see on our side, it's somewhat similar where you need to really understand where the losses are occurring. Like there's a lot of loss that happens in the last mile. There's a lot of loss that happens around changeover points of ownership, right? At docks, at ports, in airports, etc. So really getting tight controls around those points, perhaps having those same level of controls throughout the rest of the journey might be overkill. Might be the trade-off between loss and cost is that equation is very different throughout the entire journey versus around those areas where the real risk and losses are occurring. So really getting granular and understanding your network, I think, is from what we've seen with our partners and customers, that's step number one.
Um, and and sort of a nudge to look at the total best cost or the total best solution, so to speak. because in most cases, right, one of the biggest hurdle to technology adoption is change management. I think that is a different animal altogether. But in general, cost is a big impediment when you start adopting new technologies. Cost regulation is another big impediment. But when you look at the total best cost, maybe that's a very fractional part of it. But I think with a little bit of a nudge there, it might help move the needle with respect to reducing the losses.
100%. So it's time for my favorite segment, lightning round called hot, cool, or cold. So tell me if you are bullish, neutral, or pessimistic on each of the following subjects in 15 seconds or less. So real-time IoT devices visibility in general.
I'm neutral on that.
Neutral. Interesting. Why is that?
I was actually going to say bullish, but I'm curbing my enthusiasm just a little bit because from what I've learned from the industry, um, the passive data loggers that have been tried and tested with all the tribal knowledge that comes along with that, I think that's here to stay, and it is going to take a lot of work
Mm-hmm.
uh, for us to actually augment to that or to add to that. As much as I would like to say otherwise, I think that's a fact, and I'm seeing it not just from the industry, not just from the blood industry, even from a pharma industry, even from a more time and cost sensitive industry. I just feel like passive data loggers are still there to stay, and making that shift from making that simple hardware shift is going to take a lot of work,
Yeah.
and then moving that needle to making that hardware shift to the intelligence shift, it's gonna take a little bit of time. So I'm neutral.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 years from now, maybe another pandemic, and we might change our mind. So
Do you think it's a cost thing? Do you think it's a change management thing? What do you think is the major barrier of real time IoT adoption?
I think it's a change management thing.
Okay,
I
100%.
don't think it's a cost thing.
Yeah.
It's not because customers have the dollars to pay. I just feel like the need is there. There is no two ways about the fact that there is a need for it. I think it's about finding a way to adopt it and finding a way to keep the change management smooth and transitional.
100% agree. No, yeah, the way that real time IoT implementations are done, we've seen a lot of good ones. We've seen a lot of really bad ones, and the amount of potential human error with device activation, operators not wanting to add a step in the process to push a button, the complexity around the pushing of the button on the device itself, regional levels of buy-in, right, and enforcement of adhering to the process and making sure that all of the right pallets are tagged or products are tagged. Man, it always takes about 3x longer than what everybody thinks, right?
Completely agree with you. It is definitely a thing of the near future, though. So
Yes.
that's why I was kind of flirting between bullish and neutral.
Yeah, I think what we typically say is like adoption is fast, implementation is slow. I think everybody's 100% bought in, and in the process of deploying IoT into their networks, but the actual speed and pace of implementation is much slower than what everybody assumes they'll be able to do. So even to just get a couple hundred lanes up and live, getting to a lot of the larger pharmas have thousands of lanes, right? 3, 4, 5,000. That's going to take a significant amount of time. So I agree with you. I mean, for that reason, I think, and the device qualification itself, selecting the wrong device is very expensive. Then going back 6 months down the road saying, oh no, like I probably didn't choose the right device, and now I got to decouple from the platform, find a new platform, find a new device. Yeah, it gets to be pretty messy. So totally agree with you. Then the next one is you already answered passive data loggers. What about you're starting to see a lot more of these like active cooling parcel level packaging. So not like the large, EnviroTainer's pallet level, but parcel level that I think would fit squarely into a lot of the clinical applications, probably some of the areas that you guys play in as well. What's your take on parcel sized active cooling and heating packaging?
So one of the challenges with the parcel size is the weight limitation, right? So a couple of reasons weight limitation is one is anytime it goes over 40 pounds, it's not a regular parcel anymore. So you have to have some special handling on top of it. The second piece is the dimensional weight versus the weight piece of it. So when people charge you, when the 3PLs charge you, they charge you for they call it billable weight, which is they bill you for whichever the larger number is, whether it's the weight of the package or the dimensional weight of the package. So any active cooling mechanism you're going to have is going to have two things. It's going to increase the dimensional weight of the box one way or another. It's going to make the box heavy, or it's going to make the box larger because you have to have that kind of a mechanism in there.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing is you can only have so much energy. Physics probably hits a certain ceiling at a certain point, and there is a point where your passive cooling system and the active cooling system actually crosses a certain curve, and beyond that curve you probably don't have a need for it. So yes, it definitely has its own space. It is useful, it is helpful, but whatever passive shippers are doing today are actually not only checking all the boxes, it is also going above and beyond with a 40-50% factor of safety to ensuring product safety. So it has its space, but not practically.
So is that a neutral or is that a pessimistic?
It's pessimistic.
Okay, there it is. All right. How about sustainability? Do you believe sustainability is a compliance checkmark in today's world, or do you think there's genuine care about investing in sustainability?
I think there's genuine care, even if it is coming from a fraction of the industry. We cannot ignore the genuinity there. I think we have to respect that. You will argue against, one can argue against me saying, well, it is not, but I think there is genuine care, even if it is coming from a handful of customers. And almost everything starts with a handful of people. Even if it is a new technology adoption, it is only the early folks who actually jump on the bandwagon that starts to rally things,
Yeah.
right? So I think just from that standpoint, I'm very bullish on that. I think it's going to take us to the next level. Yes.
How about generative AI in temperature controlled logistics? Is it a fad or is it ready for prime time?
I don't think it's ready for prime time.
Okay.
Not quite yet. I think the most important thing that needs to happen is switching the hardware, trying to help people to move from a passive logger to an active logger. I think the hardware switch is probably the first and foremost thing that has to happen.
Okay.
After that, we have to talk about the data and the thermal intelligence that, or any sort of data intelligence that could surmount that. And then AI finds a good space. I think we are probably 3 to 5 years early, but this is the right time to talk about it. This is the right time to push the agenda because it's going to take the kind of time.
Yeah. So looking forward, what trends or innovations do you envision reshaping the cold chain? I mean, I know you said active IoT devices you think will kind of take off over the next couple of years. Then you mentioned the data analytics, the generative AI piece to follow that. What other things, maybe more specific around packaging, do you expect to continue to improve, change over the next? What kind of packaging innovation do you expect to see over the next 2 years?
Um, I think a little bit of sustainability in packaging is very helpful, which is sustainability in the sense of um, smaller, more dimensionally efficient packaging, which kind of helps with reduction of CO2 emissions. That's one form of sustainability. The other form is, fully recyclable materials. What if it is not styrofoam? What if it's a fully recyclable, for example, a fully curbside recyclable packaging, where maybe a patient receiving a last mile drug can actually take their medicine and throw the packaging in the recycle bin. I think that is something that we are working on, and that's a good next step where you have fully sustainable packaging. Slightly thinking ahead of time, what if it is completely carbon neutral? What if your packaging is going completely green for
Yeah.
that matter? From a technology standpoint, I would start imagining something of a connected package. say for the next 5 to 10 years, we use all the real-time IoT hardware. We get all of the useful real-time data, start building thermal models, start building data models, start doing things. Maybe 10, 15 years from now, we don't even have to use any hardware. All we need is, good thermal intelligence, and AI can actually take care of that. So I think it is the future is trending in that direction with a combination of sustainability and technology.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, Balaji, before we wrap up, we'd love to hear about a logistics legend story. So maybe a time when you or a colleague, anybody that you've worked with, a customer, went above and beyond to get the job done. Do you have any examples of that?
I have quite a few examples, but I'll share this one example. We are and we were work. We started working with one of the largest sort of blood processors here in the States, and this was right after the pandemic when there was a lot of lingering questions around supply chain, and um, we all know what kind of happened around that time. So we were supposed to deliver a lot of different blood shippers. These were mostly tube shippers to 75 different locations all across the states. This was different cities, different processing centers, different blood centers. This was around the time when the whole supply chain was unpredictable.
Yeah.
And we had these materials coming in from different parts of the states. So and every different material has to go through a couple of stakeholders, a couple of freight forwarders, and that was the time when we had some unprecedented delays with respect to supply chain. And our customer was in a time crunch where they had to get something up and running. So it was a great catch-22 situation for us, but thankfully, with a lot of uh, good partnership from the customer and from our vendors, we were able to get this done. We actually delivered all the necessary shippers. This was thousands of shippers to all the 75 different locations on time, and we continue to service the customers in that location. So that to me was a big one, and I have to thank the team and the customer for that. So thankfully, we came out on that one.
That's pretty impressive, Balaji. I want to first of all thank you so much for joining us. I think this was a fascinating episode. Certainly learned a ton about packaging, and we look forward to having you back in the future.
Great. Thanks for having me, and good to see you, Ilya. Take care.
Awesome. Good to see you, Balaji. So that's one cool wrap for FrostBytes. Again, Balaji, thank you for sharing your wisdom with our listeners. To our listeners, thanks for continuing to tune in. Our first 3 episodes actually crossed 35,000 views and counting, I think, on YouTube alone. So definitely keep it going. I know this one will certainly add a lot to that. So don't forget to subscribe to PAXAFE and follow PAXAFE on LinkedIn. And stay connected for more insights from leaders in cold chain logistics. Until next time.